Home for the Holidays, a Powder Lake Small Town Romance by D.L. White. Chapter 1. Read. The low hum of tires on pavement hung in the background as I navigated the winding roads from Healy, Georgia, to my hometown of Powder Lake. The shadows of tall pines that lined the road danced before me. The scent of pine needles wafted through the vents, reminding me of riding bikes with my friends on these same streets. My grip on the steering wheel had become tighter over the course of my conversation with Mitchell, my partner at Sterling and Gallagher Development. "If we don't do it, someone else will." Mitchell Sterling's throaty voice boomed through the speakers in the car, reminding me that this wasn't purely a social trip. I hadn't returned to Powder Lake because I missed my family, or because I wondered how the small, slow southern town had fared since I left it after graduating from Healy University. I'd returned because if I didn't complete the land survey, my partner would swoop in and, without a shred of reverence for the idyllic lakeside community, propose an unwelcome footprint of box stores and fast food restaurants. From what I'd heard about recent goings-on in Powder Lake, that wouldn't go well. My parents were officially in their golden years, so under the guise of checking in on my family home, I agreed to take some time between Thanksgiving and Christmas to do a cursory check of the town and report back. "I don't see how you're not excited about this, Reed. It's practically a blank canvas from what I hear. They're growing at an incredible rate, and there's no doubt they need someone to step in and offer some direction and opportunity, maybe a few modern conveniences." "Well, it's not Mayberry, Mitch," I replied, knowing Mitchell wasn't really listening for my input, but to hear himself speak. This was our dance. He was a bundle of energy, bursting with enthusiasm and full of ideas. I was slower, methodical. I saw each project as a puzzle, and in my mind worked out every detail before I even put pen to page. This deal, if it even had a chance to go through, would take finesse. Mitchell did not have finesse. "Look, man," I said, after letting him ramble for a few minutes. "I'm going to do the job, but respect what I have to say when the survey is over. It might look like a slam dunk on paper, but I'm telling you, there is a reason this town has been slow to develop." "I'll let you cook, but on a serious tip, you've got until the top of the year before I start moving. I'm not missing out on an opportunity because you're sentimental." "Man, don't threaten me. Every project needs 2 affirmative votes before money moves, and you've blocked me on projects before. You need my yes on this, so let me work it out, all right? You will not be able to come in here and run these folks over. They'll chase you out with pitchforks." The sound of Mitchell's laughter bounced around the interior of the spacious Ford Expedition. "All right, keep me in the loop. I've got to run, late for a quick 9 holes with Zuck." I rolled my eyes as the call disconnected. Sterling did not know Mark Zuckerberg. One of his best friends was hard at work developing a social network to take on Meta. Mitchell called him Zuck to get under his skin. I followed the off-ramp from the highway, savoring this drive since it took me along the lake where the surface of the water was smooth as a pane of glass. The potential for new business was always exciting, and Mitchell had been right. Establishing a presence like a few large convenience stores could be the boost small town needed to bring in merchandise and services not found anywhere else. The project could also create jobs and bring in revenue. However, there would be opposition to such a venture, competing with the existing mom-and-pop stores. For example, my mom-and-pop store. Our family had run Pinckney's Grocery since the town's inception. My maternal grandfather, Ellison Pinckney, first opened the grocery as a roadside stand. The store had been a reliable place to pick up sundries, grain, meat, and fruit my whole life. Anxiety surged at the thought of mentioning a land survey to my mother. I turned up the radio, fiddling with the dial to get the local station in clearer. "News and weather on the 5s, boasted Clyde Fuller, who had been saying the same thing over the air for as long as I could remember. The Temptations' Let It Snow floated through the speakers, so I let the music settle my nerves as I rolled through the outskirts of town. A pang of nostalgia hit me as I passed Bread and Butter Bakery, where I spent afternoons as a kid begging for cinnamon roll scraps. I steered the vehicle into the driveway of my childhood home and climbed out, filling my lungs with a deep inhale of crisp fall air and freshly cut grass. For a moment, I allowed myself to forget about ulterior motives and enjoy being home. My mother's plump, diminutive form stepped out of the house and onto the painted stone porch. "Well, look who made it," she called, fists planted on generous hips and her lips spread into a wide smile. "You could have called somebody to tell us you were on the way." "Hey, Mama." We spoke weekly, but her voice in my ears was nothing compared to hearing and seeing her in person. I almost missed my flight. Then the rental place only had this boat available. "Don't hey Mama me. Bring your behind up here. I got dinner waiting." I laughed as I climbed the porch steps to my mother's open arms. "You know I'm all about some dinner from your stove." She hugged me tight, wrapping both arms around me, then pulled back. "Don't seem like you all about some dinner, son," she said, squeezing my arms. "Are you doing all right? Don't you have somebody to cook up something for you now and again?" I groaned aloud, reaching behind her for the latch to the screen door. I'm fit for an almost 50-year-old man, and that's a clever way to ask if I'm dating. I'm not, by the way. "I'm not clever about a thing." She stepped over the threshold to lead the way into a well-furnished home that smelled of everything good in life. "I was happy when you divorced that gal. What's her name?" "Elodie," I supplied. She knew my ex-wife name enough to talk mess about her during my divorce. "I know that woman's name," she snapped, heading through the living room to the kitchen, stepping on lights as she went. "And I don't miss her. Had her nose in the air when we came to town, like she was doing us a favor by breathing the same air as us." Mama let out a long, offended huff while standing at the oven, sliding mitts onto her hands. "Anyway, if I wanted to know if you had replaced her sedity behind, I would have asked. I don't have to be clever about a thing." "Okay, Mama," I replied, trying to stave off a long lecture. Renita and Rachel sent me photos from Thanksgiving. Looks like it was a nice spread. "You just missed them." She opened the oven door and reared back for a few minutes to let the steam escape, then reached in to pull out several covered dishes. "They brought the husbands and kids and everything. How was the holiday with your son and her?" "It was an okay time. You know Elodie likes a party. She has a house full of people and a big catered dinner." "Would have been nice if she let you bring Joshua to Thanksgiving instead of making you go all the way to Atlanta for a big dinner full of people that aren't his family. She don't like him being out of her sight, and I don't like that. And who ever heard of a catered Thanksgiving?" "Her family is his family, and I know Pinkney's has been selling fully cooked dinners for years." "That's different than having some restaurant cook up your holiday meal. Ain't no love in those mashed potatoes." My mama was not wrong about that, and I wouldn't dare argue if she was. Instead, I reached for a roll from the pan she bought out from the oven. She popped my hand, but not fast enough. I pulled the roll apart to watch the steam rise and the butter bubble. I tossed half the roll into my mouth and chewed, grinning. Nothing but love in this roll." "Already picking at the food. Get on out of here. Go find your father. He's out in the garden. I'm sure he wants to say hello." I chuckled, pulling off my jacket and slipping my tie from around my neck. I'd caught a flight right after a meeting and was already craving a few days of being up under my mother and not wearing a suit and silk tie for 10 hours a day. I hung both from a chair and walked out through the kitchen and mudroom to the back door. The acreage behind the house was a lush carpet of green grass, then a vegetable garden plot bordered by thick woods that stretched out toward the property line. I spotted the outline of my father with his back to me, leaning over and tending to something in the dirt. I trampled through his grass in my Italian leather shoes, but didn't care. As I got closer, I saw he was pulling carrots from the ground and tossing them into a wicker basket. "Hey, old man," I said as I walked up to him, my feet crunching fallen leaves. He slowly straightened, squinting at me, breaking into a grin. "Well, look who it is," he called, his voice cracking. I reached him and grabbed him up in a gentle bear hug. He was thin but sturdy, well-muscled from years of working in the garden and stocking shelves at the store. "I was wondering when you would come through," he said, pulling back from the hug with a clap on the shoulder. "I ain't heard you pull up. Been out here in the garden trying to get the last of the harvest before we get a freeze. The temperature's supposed to drop low soon." He went back to work, asking over his shoulder, "Your mama seen you?" "She's about to serve dinner. She sent me out here to get you because I was getting on her nerves." "You know how she is about her kitchen. Why you think I'm out here?" He chuckled, his breath coming in a wheeze. Cliff Gallagher was not a man who liked to sit around doing nothing, but at his age, exerting himself in the sun could not be the best thing for him. Tell you what, Dad, you come on in, have some dinner. I'll help you finish up out here tomorrow. We should have time to get everything in before the temperature drops, right? Now that's a deal, he said, offering a hand for me to shake. He held on tight for me to pull him from the clump of dirt he was standing in. I threw an arm over his shoulder and walked with him back to the house. Over a sumptuous feast, the conversation flowed easily. Stories of my life in a suburb on the outskirts of Cleveland, Mama's updates on the neighbors and their various antics, developments at Pinckney's, and the businesses around Potter Lake. These days, they left the store in the capable hands of their management staff, but they still dropped by most days to get in the way and gossip with residents. Despite my best efforts to keep things light and focused on our personal lives, I couldn't ignore a nagging urge to broach the reason for my visit. "Hey, Mama," I said hesitantly, testing the waters. "Remember when Mayor Adams was selling off land around here and offering space for folks to open businesses?" "When he was trying to kill this town, you mean?" Her whole face bunched up with her scowl. She may as well have cursed. "Thank goodness for Mayor Kavanaugh. And Leslie, too. You remember her?" I nodded. Leslie was much younger than me, entering high school when I left Potter Lake. I'd heard the stories about her returning to the town to run the beauty shop and feuding with the owner of one of the new shops on the other side of the lake. He ran against Mayor Adams, unseating him after a long tenure in office, and married Leslie. Together, they were bringing so much change to the city. It was encouraging to me. Maybe I could get them to see my proposal as a good thing. Her thick gray brows furrowed as she quizzically stared from across the table. "Why are you asking about Mayor Adams?" I'm not," I stammered. "I mean, not really asking about Mayor Adams. I was asking about the land. If you knew if any was still up for grabs around here." "Reed Gallagher," she warned, her eyes narrowing suspiciously. "Don't go thinking we are so old that we don't remember what you do for a living. Potter Lake is not in need of any big changes like those developments you build. We're growing slow, but we're doing fine just as we are." "Of course," I agreed, sucking down a mouthful of sweet lemonade to help swallow the lump in my throat. "I was just asking, Mama." "And I've answered. Let's leave business talk for another day. You still like pound cake with strawberries, don't you?" "Yes, ma'am, I do," I replied, offering her a weak smile. Chapter 2. Sabrina. "I cannot watch this one more time," I murmured to myself, snapping off the TV on the way to the kitchen table. Of course, the only Atlanta station that came in clearly in Potter Lake would be doing a story on my husband, Adrian. The fist fight he'd been involved in with his mistress's husband was the biggest, juiciest scoop any newsroom had received in a long time. I took a seat across from my Aunt Kara, who reminded me of Olympia Dukakis. Sweet, southern, silver-haired, and spicy. She loved a good bit of gossip, so much that I began to question my decision to hole up at her house while this controversy with Adrian blew over. "This too shall pass." Aunt Kara poured us both a glass of wine and set the bottle on the table between us. "How are you holding up, honey?" "I feel like I'm suffocating," I replied, stabbing my fork into my plate. My face flushed at the recollection of that fight. It was on YouTube for the world to see and to be repeated ad nauseum until the end of time, or at least the 2-week news cycle. I prayed for something of worldwide importance to happen so the incident would be wiped off of every broadcast. I'm such a failure. Not only is my marriage over, but the whole world, or at least the state, became witness to it falling apart. They can watch it frame by frame, over and over and over. Well, now, Aunt Kara began around a mouthful of chicken, vegetables, and flaky crust. "You two were done anyway. I thought you planned to leave him. At the end of the year, not now, not this way." I sighed, pinching the bridge of my nose to stave off tears. I'd cried enough. I wanted to leave with dignity and grace, not with my dirty laundry aired out for all the world to see. "You wanted to have the upper hand." "That too." "Potato, potato," Aunt Kara replied. "I don't understand the reaction if you plan to leave anyway." "Because it's ending with me looking like I didn't know he was cheating. Like I didn't know he spends 3 hours every Wednesday at a downtown Atlanta hotel. I'm not mad that he was cheating. I'm mad that he got caught up in some brawl with a woman's husband at the fucking Regency." I took a sip of wine, trying but failing to steal my emotions. What about my career? I'm a laughing stock. As a senior asset manager at Aegis Financial, Adrian was not my direct supervisor, but it was assumed among the associates that I'd slept my way to middle management. On the contrary, I'd worked my ass off to land a role where my talents had an opportunity to shine. I was great at my job and never let being married to someone on the executive floor affect the passion that infused my work. My team and I were close, and watching this drama unfold with everyone watching was an actual nightmare. My director couldn't wait to approve my request for a leave of absence. I bet I never get another job in finance. Sabrina, that's nonsense, Aunt Kara said, pointing with her fork before going in for another serving. You are allowed to be hurt, to be upset, but you don't have to live there. Have some dinner. Your mother's chicken pot pie recipe will make those maudlin thoughts disappear. A wistful smile made my lips turn up. Cooking my mother's recipes was the best way to remember her. She passed away when I was young, leaving me in the care of her favorite sister, my Aunt Kara. She and my uncle had been the best surrogate parents I could have ever asked for. Too bad none of us saw Adrian for who he really was before I walked down the aisle in a designer gown and an explosion of pink roses. Besides, you weren't fired. Your director said to take some time away, and it was good advice to do so. And you know what the young ladies say, the best way to get over a man is to get under a new one. Aunt Kara, I am still married. Barely, she conceded, and only technically, but you plan to leave at the end of this year, and Adrian is obviously done. You're here in a town where you have no roots, and no one knows who you are except for me. The stage is set. Aunt Kara shot a sly smile across the table, her eyes twinkling with mischief. Maybe you'll meet someone who offers a bit of distraction. Her brow lifted and lowered as she paused and sipped her wine. Here? I scoffed, spooning up another bite. I came here because this town is full of people who probably don't know who Adrian is, and if they do, don't care. Although, seeing as how my aunt knows everyone's business, that might have been a mistake. My mind was still reeling from the stories she had shared since I arrived a few days ago. None of this town's secrets were safe. Their tales of unrequited love and lifelong grudges had been spilled over glasses of wine and slices of pound cake. I wasn't sure I wanted to meet any of the people Kara described, but she insisted they were mostly harmless. It wouldn't hurt to meet some people. Were you planning to hide out in the house for months on end? I hadn't really got that far in planning, but it sounds like a good idea to me. What do you do all day since you retired and moved out here? While I finished a healthy portion of chicken pot pie, Aunt Kara plied me with stories about how she spent her days in Potter Lake. Between her garden club, the Silver Sneakers walking group, her book club, the auxiliary volunteer group, and especially her bi-weekly appointment at the Curl and Dye, her calendar stayed full. She and her friend Angela, whose husband served on city council, always scheduled their appointments together so they could get in their time to gossip and catch up on other people's business. I listened with half an ear, my mind still on our earlier conversation about Adrian, and moving on from Adrian. The idea of rebound sex was not an unattractive one. Adrian and I had run hot and cold for the last few years, and I had noticed his attentions had shifted to younger and more petite women. He made it clear that despite always dressing to impress, I could drop some weight, but not to bother because I was too old and tired to turn heads. I'd caught Adrian's eye when I was younger and thinner. I was secure enough in my marriage to relax, but I wasn't displeased with the womanly, shapely figure that I had developed. If I'd been smart, I would have also been cheating. I spent so much time and effort setting myself up to walk out of his life that I hadn't thought to retaliate with someone that appreciated a woman with something to hang on to. Aunt Kara and I finished our meals and wine. While she retired to the living room, I picked up her plate and headed to the sink, rinsed the dishes and silverware, and placed them in the dishwasher. Unlike our penthouse condo, her kitchen had a large picture window that overlooked the property behind her house. It was so country and cheerful. As I had finished sweeping the kitchen floor, I glanced out of the window to admire the sunset. I was surprised to see two men in the yard next door, one older, one younger. I assumed the older man was Cliff Gallagher. Aunt Kara had mentioned that she and the Gallaghers were the same age. Aunt Kara, do the neighbors have children? They sure do. Their daughters were just here. Why? What are you looking at? Kara appeared next to me, craning her neck to see what had caught my attention. Her eyes narrowed for a moment before she shook her head. Now I'd remember that fine piece of man. Patricia has been beside herself because her son was coming to visit. He hasn't been back to Potter Lake in years. Must be him. Interesting, I mumbled, watching as the man disappeared inside the Gallagher home. Isn't it, though? Kara replied with a knowing smile. Potter Lake is small, but never boring. Aunt Kara suggested a walk around the block before we turned in for the night. She pulled a light sweater over her blouse and slipped her feet into a pair of sneakers with a bright pink swoosh along the side. My step counter says I'm short for the day, and I am in a competition. Earlene won't beat me this month. I grabbed a hoodie and pulled it on over my t-shirt, catching myself in the mirror to be sure it settled on my hips, and followed her out the door. As we walked, Kara chatted about the houses we passed, who lived where, and what their history was. She had only lived in Potter Lake for a few years, but the way people stepped out their front door to wave, to say hello, to exchange stories, you would have thought she had been born and raised in this town. My heart was so warmed and encouraged by how the community had accepted her with open arms. We made our rounds, Kara with her arms pumping, and headed back to her street. She tipped her head to the Gallagher house as we passed. Come on, may as well be neighborly, she said. Since they were sitting on the wide painted stone porch, we couldn't pretend we hadn't seen them. How do, she called, making her way up the driveway past an enormous SUV, waving one arm like a flag flapping in the wind. Out for your evening walk, I see, said an older woman from her seat. Her gray-streaked hair was pulled into a tight bun. She wore a long and faded floral caftan and held a mug of tea. A saucer with remnants of cake sat on a wooden TV tray in front of her. I've been watching the weekly numbers. If you keep it up, you'll beat Earlene this month. That's the plan, said Kara, bending to tap her cheek to the woman's. I'm taking advantage of her being out of town with the colonel. I am hoping they found a reason to be off their feet this week. She stepped back after clapping the older man on the shoulder. This here is my niece Sabrina, visiting from Atlanta for a while. She hasn't been out here since I moved from Healy, so it'll be nice to show her around our little town. Sabrina, she said to me, meet my good friend Patricia and her husband Cliff. They own Pinkney's, the neighborhood grocery. Pinkney's is where people shop the most. I extended a hand and a cordial, polite greeting to Patricia and Cliff Gallagher. I stopped at the man seated in a chair next to them. He stood and shook my hand, introducing himself as Reed Gallagher. Once I was up close, looking into warm brown eyes, in view of smooth, flawless, dark cocoa skin and a lush beard, my cheeks warmed. He wore dark jeans, a long-sleeved shirt that didn't hide muscular arms or a chiseled chest, and leather boots that made me imagine him astride a horse, for no good reason. He had a small scar above his left eyebrow that added character to his handsome face. I worked overtime to stop myself from staring. Maybe Aunt Kara's encouragement about entertaining a rebound wouldn't go unheeded. Not that I would bed the neighbor's son, but if he was in any way representative of the men in Potter Lake, I would not be in a hurry to return to Atlanta. Great to meet you, he said, in a deep voice as smooth as honey, and stepped aside. Please, take my seat. At his mother's request, he left and returned with more chairs from the back porch. Aunt Kara and I settled around the crackling fire pit that sent the scent of burning pine needles into the air. Reed, I'm sure your mother has told me before, but humor an old lady and remind me whereabouts you live. Ohio, ma'am. Shaker Heights area, a Cleveland suburb. You heard of it? At the negative shakes around the porch, he laughed. That's why I live there. And what is it that people in Shaker Heights, Ohio, do for a living? I'm a partner in a real estate development firm. We buy land and, well, develop it. We build whatever communities need for growth and innovation. Department and convenience stores, apartment buildings, shopping centers, that kind of thing. Aunt Kara hummed, rocking her head forward and back. I see. She glanced over at Patricia, then back to Reed. You're not about to treat us like we're country bumpkins, are you? I already told him to leave that alone, said Patricia. No sense in unearthing that mess that Quincy was involved in. We don't need nothing that takes business away from the stores that have always been here. We got a mayor that understands that, and I expect Kay will tell him the same. My head swiveled to catch Reed's reaction. He shrugged, saying, I'm here to visit my parents and make sure the house is sturdy, especially since there have been some fierce storms lately, and enjoy some time off work. After surveying the blank stairs, he dipped his head slightly. Okay, and if there's some land around town that's still up for grabs, my company might be interested in development. To which I say, no thank you, Patricia added. But we'll see what city council says. Mama, don't curse my plan before it's on paper. You don't even know. I know enough, she snapped. I know you blow into towns like ours, snap up land and start putting up big ugly buildings that block views of nature and take work away from homegrown businesses. How can you even consider doing something like that to the people in this town, some of whom have known you your entire life? Well, I won't stand for it, Reed. Patricia let out a huff, then picked up her saucer of cake crumbs and stood. Kara, why don't you come inside? I baked another pound cake, and if I don't start getting rid of it, we'll eat the whole thing. My aunt and Patricia stood, chatting as they walked back into the house. Cliff snapped his knee with one hand and stood as well. Got a cigar and some whiskey waiting for me on the back porch. Make sure you douse that fire before you tuck in for the night, son. With a nod, he set off around the side of the house to the backyard. I'd like to say she's not always like that, but it would be a lie, said Reed. I love that woman, but he paused, shaking his head. I can't have the same argument about my job every time I see her. That would be intense if I had to sit through it every time I came to town. Yeah, intense is a good word for it. She's all bark, though. Well, mostly bark. Reed offered a half-hearted smile, leaning to the side to whisper conspiratorially as if anyone else was on the porch with us. My dad mentioned whiskey, and now I can't think about anything else. You want a taste? I was not much of a liquor drinker, but after the week I'd had, I could use a little something to knock the edge off. I nodded. Reed left and returned with 2 mismatched tumblers of velvety brown liquid, then dropped heavily into the seat next to me. He clinked his glass against mine before taking a sip, nodding and licking his lips afterward. So, enough about me, for real. We didn't get around to putting you on the spot. You're here visiting your aunt from Atlanta for a while. I know there's a story there. I sighed, bringing the glass to my lips for a fortifying sip. It burned so good going down. Oh yeah, I said, almost choking. There's a story, all right. If liquor gives you a loose tongue, I'm all ears. Reed leaned back in his chair, all eyes on me. I shifted in my seat, heat rising in my cheeks again. I wasn't used to being the subject of such an intense gaze from a man who offered his undivided attention. I'm hiding out, I began. For someone who is prominent in Atlanta finance, my husband is a messy bitch. He's been cheating on me for some time. I thought I was being stealthy, making moves to leave him at the end of the year, but I exhaled, releasing the tightness in my chest before taking another sip of whiskey. It was strong, but it helped loosen me up. This was the most relaxed I'd been in months. He got caught by his mistress's husband. I glanced at Reed with my lips rolled inward and pressed together. He sucked in a loud, sharp breath. Oh, but there's more. There was a fight. Of course, someone recorded Adrian getting his ass beat. It's already spread like wildfire on every social media platform. If WorldStar still exists, it'll be there soon. Adrian and I work for the same company. I'm not sitting through meetings pretending everything is fine while people give me soft, sad eyes or corner me in the restroom with their stories and advice. So I took some time off and came out to Potter Lake to stay with my aunt. Reed gave me a sympathetic look. I'm sorry you're going through this, but you knew he was? I nodded, bobbing my head. I thought we'd be able to keep things quiet. One thing I need to do while I am here is move forward with the divorce that I plan to file and figure out what I'm going to do with my life. I've been married for... I fluttered my lips and shrugged before continuing. Damn near half my life. This is how it ends. Reed gestured toward my tumbler. I'm about to go get the bottle of Macallan. You're going to need a lot more to drink.